The two children of King Viserys, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen and Prince Aegon II, were the two main contenders for the Iron Throne during the Dance of Dragons after Viserys' death, were not significantly different in their policies and deeds. Both sought the throne primarily out of a sense of entitlement and familial duty, rather than a genuine desire to improve the realm. Though in the show adaptation at least, it showed that Aegon knew he would be a disaster for the realm and tried to flee to Essos to prevent becoming king, he allowed his family to press his claim for the throne so that he could wear the crown. But to be honest, both Aegon's and Rhaenyra's reigns were marked by personal vendettas, brutal enforcement of their rule, and a willingness to commit atrocities to secure their power. Their approach to governance did not offer the common people any substantial difference in terms of justice, economic relief, or protection. Daemon Targaryen, Rhaenyra's uncle and husband and a prominent figure in the dance, was somewhat distinct in his ability to inspire loyalty among the common folk, particularly the City Watch of King's Landing, known as the Gold Cloaks. His leadership, charisma, and direct interaction with the men of the City Watch earned him their admiration and loyalty. However, Daemon's effectiveness in appealing to the common people was limited in scope and did not translate into widespread policy changes or significant relief for the general populace of Westeros. To the commoners, or small folk, the civil war between Rhaenyra and Aegon was largely irrelevant. The small folk were many rungs down the social ladder in Westeros, far removed from the power struggles of the elite. Unless one was a member of a great house with a direct stake in the outcome, or a high-ranking lord who stood to benefit from the victory of one faction over the other, the war had little bearing on the daily lives of the common people. The plight and needs of the small folk were often overlooked in the grand machinations of the noble houses. The social hierarchy in Westeros was rigid and steep, significantly affecting the lives and concerns of its people. But let's take a look at it to further understand our point, keeping in mind this is a general and brief breakdown of the class structure in Westeros, not an exhaustive or scholarly one. At the bottom of the social ladder, peasants worked the land and had little to no influence or power. Their lives were characterized by hard labor and poverty. Slightly above peasants, landed knights held small plots of land and were sworn to serve higher lords. They had some status and privileges, but were still relatively low in the social hierarchy. Next were the lords of small houses. These lords controlled minor lands and had limited power. They were sworn to more powerful houses and had some influence, but were still far from the top. On the next rung was a lord of a major house. Major houses had significant power and lands, commanding respect and resources. However, they were often sworn to even more powerful great houses. And now, we reach the upper echelons of power, of great houses that actually could call on other great houses as their bannermen. One such house was House Tyrell, who actually had the great and powerful House Hightower numbered among their bannermen. Great houses, such as the Hightowers and Tyrells, wielded immense power and influence. They were often vassals to even mightier houses like the Targaryens, but had substantial autonomy and wealth. Near the top of the apex of the power hierarchy in Westeros, we had princes and princesses of House Targaryen. Members of the royal family had the highest status, one wholly unearned bestowed upon them by virtue of their very birth. They were often vying for favor and position within their own house to gain the throne or other prestigious roles in the eyes of the king and queen, who were at the apex of the social structure, but were, for all intents and purpose, princes or princesses who managed to inherit the throne. So why would someone so far at the bottom of the rungs of power care what those at the top get up to if it doesn't affect their lives? And while Aegon and Rhaenyra may not have been dissimilar in their disregard for the common people, Rhaenyra especially earned their ire by raising taxes upon them to fill her depleted coffers, an act that greatly exacerbated the anger of the people at a prolonged war that was only to their overall detriment. The Shepherd, a mysterious and fiery and charismatic anti-Targaryen agitator that espoused the faith of Seven, was able to tap into the deep-seated resentment and anger of the smallfolk in Westeros. He preached against the Targaryens, blaming their dragons for the suffering and destruction that had befallen the realm. And who could say that he was wrong with all that was going on? The common people, already weary and impoverished by the continuous warfare and chaos of the Dance of Dragons, were receptive to his message. The Shepherd's rhetoric fueled their anger, framing the dragons as symbols of the Targaryens' tyranny and the cause of their miseries. The culmination of the Shepherd's influence was the storming of the Dragon Pit in King's Landing. He incited a mob of smallfolk to take direct action against the dragons, promising them liberation from their oppressors. This attack was not just an act of rebellion against the Targaryens, but also a desperate attempt by the smallfolk to reclaim some semblance of control over their lives. The slaughter of the dragons in the Dragon Pit marked a significant turning point, showing how powerful collective anger and charismatic leadership could be in mobilizing the masses against their rulers. Did the Shepherd work for the Maesters as part of their anti-magic conspiracy? For a foreign power that sought to weaken the Targaryen stranglehold on dragon power? Or was he just a fanatic believer in the faith of the Seven who tapped into a very real zeitgeist? Who can say? If it was a choice between a king, like who at least had a long and peaceful reign for the most part, and someone that would have been a disaster for the realm, then that might at least be something a commoner could consider. But both Aegon and Rhaenyra turned out to be utter disasters for the realm, so why would the smallfolk view them as any different? Great houses frequently sought to curry favor with the king or his immediate family to secure advantageous marriages into House Targaryen. Such unions elevated the status and power of these houses, cementing alliances and strengthening their influence. Similarly, princes and princesses within House Targaryen vied for favor and status to position themselves as heirs to the throne, a position traditionally given to the eldest son, but often contested. And in these deadly Game of Thrones, smallfolk were pieces on a board, and with only the rarest exceptions, were never players. So as much as some in the fandom might argue that this princess should have got the throne for whatever reason and was kept from it because she was a woman, somehow missing the fact that Rhaenyra garnered the support of many powerful houses in her bid, or this prince should have gotten the throne for whatever reason. What did that matter to those struggling to eke out a living in the lowest class in the Seven Kingdoms? Who cares if it is Rhaenyra or Aegon who sits on the throne when your family might starve? One can view the fictional events of the dance through a lens of modern-day ideologies however they like, but the real-world peasants of medieval times would have viewed those as useless to them as the people in Westeros. They only cared about not being crushed underfoot in the war and being to provide for themselves and their families. The Dance of Dragons illustrates the inherent instability and destructiveness of a hereditary monarchy where personal ambition and entitlement drive policy and deed, and getting a decent ruler most times is simply luck of the draw. Rhaenyra and Aegon, the Scion's similarities in governance, offer no respite to the common folk who remain distant from these power struggles. The rigid social hierarchy of Westeros further alienates the small folk, underscoring their indifference to the outcomes of such conflicts. The pursuit of favor and power within the noble and royal houses highlights the self-serving nature of the elite, contrasting sharply with the plight of the everyday people who bear the brunt of their ambitions.